roll the dice, hope for high. Turns in the dungeon, reach the sky.
Good morning, friends. Welcome back to the channel. I'm the GM Philosopher, and this morning we're talking about D&D player conflict. Now, why am I talking about this today? Well, listen, on Sunday night, I played in my usual game as a player. I'm playing Grom Izak, a Minotaur bard who is lawful evil. He's a merchant, and basically wants to build a big merchant company, and that's sort of his personal goal in the game. You can find the live stream of that session, which was actually session number 2, where we had a battle with elves. Link is in the description. You can find it on the Dungeons and 20s channel. It was streamed and it's been posted on YouTube. With that being said, we had some pretty interesting role play toward the end of that episode that really got my creative gears thinking, because we had several characters within the game who were basically disagreeing over how to handle an possibly alleged elf prisoner. It was sort of a Colosseum situation, and the expectation was that we were going to wipe out these elves. With that being said, there was one elf who was a little girl, like basically a young teenager. She was scared. She was too scared to even fight. Obviously, didn't seem to be a combatant. My character thought that we might want to take her prisoner and basically turn her into an assistant. She spoke Elvish, and my character does not speak Elvish. And seeing as how the party plans to travel to Elven lands, having an Elvish-speaking translator, in Grom's opinion, would have been useful. Also, he could use someone to carry his luggage and to help him sort and track the wares he plans to purchase and resell as a merchant. With that being said, there was a paladin in the group who had an oath of vengeance, mostly against elves, and there was another orc in the group who, let's just say, had different ideas about elves than even Grom. And there was a druid who basically wanted to save her because he thought he might want to train her as a druid. So there was a lot of disagreement here, and it led to a character conflict, but it did not lead to a player conflict. And I want to talk about this. I want to break this down today, because here's the thing. In D&D, sometimes people disagree about things. Sometimes characters disagree about things. But these two situations are actually different, and how you handle them is actually different. So we're going to go all through it. If you ever have conflict at your table that turns into players actually disagreeing with each other, maybe even getting upset at each other, maybe even getting grumpy, angry, maybe even arguing, getting actual hurt feelings, I'm going to teach you how to handle that in this video. I've dealt with this a lot being a GM, and I have seen experienced players be able to handle conflict really well, but I've also seen players get actually high-key mad and offended over conflict. So let's dive into it, talk about it. You're not going to want to miss this. Boom, let's go. Now, the first thing we need to discuss is the difference between good conflict and bad conflict. Now, in D&D, drama is the spice of life. We want drama. We want role play. We want for there to be high stakes. We want for the players to care deeply. And that's ultimately, if it's going really well, going to lead to drama and conflict. And we love drama and conflict. But we want it to be good in-game drama between characters that the players can laugh about and still have a good time with. Drama that stays in the game is beautiful. Mwah, this is what we live for. We want spicy drama and conflict between characters sometimes. Yes, we want the characters to work together, but ultimately what we want to do is create a fun, immersive, entertaining storyline. And what good is a story without a little drama, without some conflict? There are going to be problems, okay? And the characters should be the ones dealing with it. The players should be having fun as the characters navigate problems. And this is what separates good conflict from bad conflict. Good conflict is simply this: when characters are having conflict, but the players are not. And the players are laughing and having fun and role-playing it, but staying immersive. They should care about the conflict, but not so much so that they're actually mad at the other players. This is good conflict. This is what we want in a D&D game. This should be encouraged and rewarded by the GM. And in fact, I will say that GM William, who was running the game for us on Sunday, rewarded all the players with inspiration for the immersive character conflicts that happened, because it was so much fun and so awesome. And that was a nice reward. It was like, yeah, heck yeah, we deserve a little inspiration for this because we all obviously cared very deeply about the situation, and our characters had their own beliefs. And so that's why there was like this 4-way split between like what we thought we should do. With that being said, let's now define bad conflict. Bad conflict is conflict that moves beyond the characters into the realm of real life and the players, where the players start to have emotions run high. They start to maybe get upset. Maybe they start to get mad. Maybe they start to get angry. Maybe it starts to become personal between the player and the other player, not just about the characters. This is when you have a real potential for the game to go off the rails and get not fun, where it can hurt people's feelings, where people can get angry. And hey, we're here to have fun when we play D&D. We're here to tell an immersive story. We're not here to like get angry and be mad at each other and have a bad time. So here's the big question. How do you keep conflict good, right? And then keep it from getting bad? And what should you do if it gets bad? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that next. So step one is actually really a detection step. It is to pay attention to player emotions, okay? Paying attention to player emotions will alert you as to when good conflict is turning into bad conflict. And here's why. If you notice that your players are laughing, they're still having fun, they're still being friendly and cordial to each other, they're still having a good time with the game, but the characters are having conflict, you're pretty much all good. There's really no problem here. When you should start to get worried is when players start to get higher running negative emotions. If a player seems to be getting really upset, if a player seems to start raising their voice in a non-role playing manner, if a player starts like making actual passive aggressive jabs at the player, not the character having passive aggressive jabs at the other character, but the player making jabs at the other player or something like that, or any out of game banter that seems argumentative or negative in nature. This is when the GM should probably take a look at the situation and say, hold on here. We're moving from good conflict into bad conflict, and we need to take action to try to prevent this from getting worse and possibly, hopefully, move the conflict back into the game instead of letting conflict between players basically evolve into a full blown argument or disagreement that could hurt people's feelings or ruin the game for them. And here in a minute, we're going to talk about exactly how to make that happen. But before we do that, real quick, I want to show you my featured product of the video. In case you haven't noticed, I'm rocking some new D&D bling. Check this out. I have my official ADHD and D t-shirt as a picture of a dice. I'm going to show you here. Now, I am a qualified Amazon affiliate. This means that if you go down in the description, you click on my link for this cool t-shirt and you purchase something, guess what? I'll earn a very small commission on your purchase to help support the channel and zero additional cost to you. So if you're going to be rocking some cool D&D merch and you enjoy the channel, hey, guess what? Click down in the link in the description, order your ADHD and D Rule for Concentration t-shirt, rock and roll in awesome cool D&D gear like the rest of us, and at no additional cost. You'll be helping us support the channel, which I appreciate very, very, very much. So thank you so much in advance for that. Now, let's jump back into the video. So what do you do if you notice that conflict is starting to move from in-game to out-of-game, going from good to bad, becoming too much, going to cause an actual fight or argument or make someone upset? So here's the next step. You can sometimes head off conflict through NPC interaction or distraction. And actually, this is something that you can do early on, and sometimes it helps a lot. So here are two ways you can do this. Number one, you can have an NPC interject and say something that might unify the players. Okay, so let's just say that the players are kind of like, getting a little heated over what to do with the elven prisoner. And they're sort of arguing, fighting with each other. So then you get an NPC to get involved and say something like, okay, and this is maybe going to sound weird. And, I can already hear the comments. People are going to say, GM Philosopher, what the heck are you doing? Why are you doing this with the NPC? This is going to make things worse, or this is stupid, or whatever. I already hear the comments. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about this tactic and if you've used it before. But sometimes if you use your NPC to say something that's actually kind of inflammatory that will unite the players, this can actually work in your favor and be a good distraction and kind of head off problems. So for example, you have the two players arguing over the elf, right? What are we going to do about the prisoner? One of them wants to kill her, one of them wants to set her free, or take her as sidekick, whatever. Then you have an NPC come in and basically say, You know what I think? I think both of you are really off base. And in fact, I don't even know why we're here. It shows a lack of leadership on both of your parts. So, you know what I have to say about that? Throws down their sword belt. I'm done. I quit. You can all screw yourselves. And then the NPC walks away. Now, you want to be a little bit careful. And in some situations, this doesn't work super well. You kind of got to know what you're looking at. But the idea here is this: you want to find a way to get these players to feel like they're on the same side. And getting to know your players really well before you do this is probably a good idea, because you could say something that makes it worse. But if you know that you can kind of bring a third angle that both of these both of these player characters will disagree with, something that'll bring them together, something that'll make them both be like, what the heck? What the heck? You know what? Hold on. This NPC is so off base. We both need to address this really quick, right? And you can kind of get them on the same team, maybe even get them to team up in an argument against the NPC and then win, or maybe even get them to team up and like fight another enemy or something, right? Like maybe something like that. It's about getting them on the same team, finding a way to distract and get them on the same team. If you can cause something to get that to happen, this can be a good distraction. It can head it off. And this is just like, getting them to realize, oh, we're still on the same team. We're just disagreeing about this thing. By the way, do you struggle to come up with plot arcs on the fly? If so, I have the perfect tool for you. It is called My Ultimate Plot Randomizer. It is a free ebook. When you join my email list, you can download this for free. You'll get the link in your first email. It contains 4 D100 tables that will let you roll random plot arcs whenever you need them. Roll the hook, the conflict, and the conclusion, and even add wild and wacky stuff all right there. Download this, print it out, add it to your tool collection, and you will never go without another plot arc again. I give this away for free to help you create awesome plot arcs just like I do. I use this in almost every single session, and you are not going to want to miss out on this, so make sure you grab this. And sometimes that can distract from the problem. Now, another great way to do this is to try to do something that makes them both laugh. So you can take an NPC and do something funny, or you can have a situation, basically have something happen in the middle of the conflict that maybe the whole table would find funny. And if you can get both players to laugh at a thing, like a funny situation or a funny joke, or you say something kind of ridiculous, if you can get them to laugh, I think that laughing releases some feel-good chemicals in our brains that cause us to not want to fight and have conflict. And sometimes that can really diffuse it. I've seen players borderline arguing, and then like maybe I tell a joke or I have a situation happen that they actually laugh at, and then afterwards they're just like, oh yeah, we were fighting about this elf. All right, let's do this. And then they just figure it out. Just because they had a little distraction and they laughed and got back to like that headspace. That negative downward spiral of emotion was interrupted by something fun and uplifting. So this can be one way to head it off. And this is usually my first step. Okay. But what happens if this doesn't work, or if you don't get a good opportunity for something like this? Well, then we move to the next step. If this doesn't really work through NPC distraction, then the next step that I go to is this. If emotions escalate to the point of conflict, do a friendly pause and highlight exactly what seems to be happening to the players, then describe what you'd like to avoid. So this is you as the GM basically stepping in as the arbiter of the conversation and basically saying, hey, let's take a quick break for a minute. Here's what I feel like is happening. I feel like you guys, like your characters, are having this conflict in game, which is actually super fun and understandable. And you're both role-playing your characters very well. With that being said, I feel like this is now coming into the real world. I kind of feel like you, player 1, and you, player 2, are getting a little actually upset at each other. Would you say that that is a correct, assessment, or not really? And then let them talk about it, or let them say their part, right? And then I would like to say what I would like to avoid. So in this situation, I might say something like, so here's what I want to avoid. Like, I want like the game to go well and your characters to like talk through things or this or that, this or that. What I don't want is for you two to actually be mad at each other or to actually have an argument. I would like to avoid that. I know that in situations like this, tensions can run really high. I don't want that to affect your experience of playing the game. Now, when you state this, basically this is what you're doing. You're sort of throwing down a flag, appealing to the players outside of the game in a human, just friend to friend kind of way. stating what you see seems to be happening, and then labeling the area that you don't want to get to, like the area you're trying to stop the group from getting to. And what this basically does is raise awareness. It makes players, or hopefully makes them, this is the idea anyway, it makes them stop and think about what is going on. And a lot of times, in my experience, 90% of the time, when players make this realization, when they realize what's actually happening, they stop and be like, oh, yeah, like their emotions were running high. When we get emotional, we don't always think objectively about the situation. We sort of move into reaction mode. So we just react to the other things. So they may be reacting to each other without even realizing that they are getting mad at each other or that it's becoming like a conflict or an argument. Once they realize that, that may be all it takes for them to be like, okay, I'm sorry, man, cool. Like, I was honestly getting a little, angry about that, but it is in game. I want to keep it in game. Like a lot of times players will say that. They'll say, okay, cool. Now, with that being said, what if this doesn't really work? Like, what if when they describe how they feel, they describe being angry at each other and they verify, yeah, it started in the game, but I'm actually mad. Now you have a situation where even though you've raised awareness, there is still conflict. They're aware of the conflict and they still wish to have the conflict. What do you do in this situation? Okay, here's my step for this. And I know what you're thinking. You might be thinking, GM, what in the heck? Do you have a bunch of maniacs at your table? No. Listen, I know these steps because I've done this many times. And the reason I've done this many times is because I have run games for like 20 years, sometimes 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 players per game, a lot of different people. I have arbitrated a lot of actual disagreements between players at games. A lot. Like people getting actually mad, people getting offended. I've had a lot of these types of situations at my games. Mostly back in the earlier days when I was inviting like a lot of people, different people, D&D, and I didn't have like what I would call a specifically curated group. It was sort of an open revolving door and people could come play D&D. And unless they were like a criminal or a terrible person, I would basically welcome them to the game and at least give them a chance, right? So I've had a lot of conflicts in D&D. So I'm just pausing here to let you know, I'm not just pulling these out of my butt. I have actually cultivated this list from experience. And this is my D&D conflict reaction plan right here. And I have run through this so many times I could do it in my sleep. So boom, that's why we're here. So what happens if awareness doesn't solve the problem and there's an actual problem and then you need to try to help answer it? Well, let's move on to that step next. But before we do that, real quick, I just want to stop and tell you about my new book that I recently published. It's called The Haunting at Ashburrow. It's a 5-session plot arc adventure module designed for any fantasy TTRPG system. This is a hardcover. It comes in a soft cover or in a very affordable ebook. The artwork looks pretty incredible. It has 5 sessions of stuff that can easily be spread into 10 sessions. Goals, maps, NPCs, everything you need to run a demonic, haunting adventure, scary, horror, thriller, creepiness, demon stuff. If you want to see an in-depth look at this, I'm going to link to the video up in the card. That video will basically give you a walkthrough, show you the pages, show you the content of the book. You can also click down in the description, go to my Blurb bookstore, check out the different editions, hardcover, softcover, ebook, find the ones right for you. If you want to run an awesome module for your players, I highly recommend The Haunting at Ashburrow. This could even serve as a launching point for a whole campaign, and there's easily, even though it's called a 5-session adventure module, I'm running it for my Discord group, and it could easily be a 10-session adventure module. Lots of mystery, lots of puzzles, lots of action, combat, interesting encounters and role play, complex interactions, etc. So, hey, take a look at that, check it out. And if you buy this on my Blurb bookstore, it helps to support the channel. So, hey, grab a great adventure and support the channel at the same time. And I think it turned out awesome. If raising awareness, describing what you see is happening, and then describing why you don't want the conflict to continue, or describing where you don't want the conflict to go doesn't get the players to relent, then we move to the next step, which is ask questions and attempt to understand exactly what's going on with each player. So at this point, I'll generally say, okay, hey, let's take a quick break. We're gonna just pause the game for just a minute. I totally get it. I totally get that right now there seems to be a conflict going on between you and you. All right, I would like to just take a moment and let's talk it through for just a second. So player one, why don't you describe exactly what is wrong, exactly why you are upset right now. Let them explain, and then we go on to player two. So player two, let's go to you. Why exactly are you upset right now? Go ahead and tell us, right? So we want to get both of these people to basically try to describe exactly what the problem is, exactly what the problem is. And if we can figure that out, and you as the GM can figure that out, then we can move to the next step, which is try to help broker a deal, right? Okay, so you have the disagreement, the conflict. Emotions are running high. These things happen. Be forgiving, be understanding. If you have a player at your table who's being mean or being a bully or abusing people, that's different. What I'm describing here is just actual conflict between good players who are just, their emotions are running high. The next step is to try to broker a deal. So here's what I mean by this. What you do is you kind of ask player one, it's like, okay, all right, hey, what would need to happen in this situation for you as a player to not feel so upset about it? Obviously, your character feels a certain kind of way. That drama is fine, in the game. What we don't want is for you to actually be mad. We don't want for the game to be ruined for you. So why don't you tell us exactly what you would like to see happen that would help you to not be upset outside of game? And then we ask player two the exact same thing, and we try to get a semblance of where we could maybe make a deal and negotiate. And then as the GM, I can help to arbitrate it, communication sake. So for example, player one might say, here's the thing, my character doesn't want to kill the elf actually, and me as a player, I'm angry that you are not, your character is not listening to my character. My character is explaining it to you and it makes sense. You're not listening. Okay, maybe that's what's wrong. So then I say to player two, I would say, okay, player two, now player one says they don't feel like you are listening to them. Okay, why don't you respond to that? And then they may say, well, my character has this oath of vengeance. They want to kill the elf, right? So it's just to use that example, and it's they want to kill the elf, and your persuasion isn't strong enough. Yes, your idea does, I can see your idea does have rational merit, but in game, my character doesn't think that. My character doesn't think that. Okay, so we're seeing a situation here. So now in the game, what actually happened, in William's game the other night, and for the record, that session, that conflict stayed in game. It did not go outside the game. The players did not get mad at each other. I'm using it as an example, just the scenario for what if it had, right? And I'm just using the mechanics of that example as an example. What happened in that session was we ended up kind of coming to a compromise. We sort of snuck around the paladin. My character ended up stabbing the elf, and then he kind of whispered to the druid, cast, as soon as we get into the hallway outside of the Colosseum, cast spare the dying on her. Okay, basically is what we worked out. So there's we were trying to just have the paladin not see, killing the elf because the crowd was chanting that they wanted the elf to die, and this appeased the paladin for the moment. And then this also pleased the druid who wanted to save her, because it's oh, okay, we get a chance to save her. Grom did want to save her, but not really at the expense of offending the paladin very much. But he was thinking maybe he could talk the paladin into letting her live once they got out of the Colosseum. So he thought, okay, basically I'm just biding time. So there was a compromise reached, right? So, but sometimes if people are upset, you can't reach a compromise in game. You have to reach a compromise out of game that you're going to use in game. So the GM might actually come up with ideas. As the GM, I might suggest to them, okay, how about this? Your character wants her dead, obviously. Your character wants her to stay alive. What if we did this? What if your character tried to, your character killed her to appease the paladin, or you let the paladin kill her, but then player one, you plan to drag her into the hallway and cast Spare the Dying on her, and you try to hide it from the paladin, right? So, this could be a thing that could appeal to both your characters. So me as a GM, I'll actually present this to the players as an option. I'll try to give them this idea. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to get the players to basically make a deal about what they can do in game that would help, move the game forward. And then hopefully in making this deal, the emotions will calm down a bit and they won't actually be arguing or having conflict anymore. Hopefully we're trying to transition from taking the conflict out of game, calming it down, moving it back into the game. Some other steps that you can take here include be friendly and try to get everyone involved to laugh and diffuse tension. And you can do this outside of game. So I tried to make people laugh with an NPC earlier in the steps, but outside of game, I can literally joke around with the two players and try to get them to laugh just to diffuse tension. Like try to be fun, try to be upbeat. If you can get people to laugh, you can generally get tension to diffuse, okay? And then another thing you can do is if the negotiating isn't really working and the players actually can't see eye to eye and they're just continuing to headbutt and continuing to have conflict, then you might actually have to just continue to try to repeat that compromising step, keep trying to get them to laugh. And basically you can ask the other players, hey, does anyone else have any ideas about what could be done in this situation, right? And so it has been very rare in my experience that approach doesn't work. Sometimes you do need to go around the compromise table outside of game 2 or 3 times to get the players to agree on an in-game course of action. But a lot of times, like that's only in more serious situations of conflict. A lot of times, all of these steps are going to have a high chance of resolving your issue before you even get here. By the time we get to the point where the GM has kind of paused the game and is talking to players, that's a lot more extreme situation. I would say 75% of all conflicts basically get resolved at or before just raising awareness about them, like before that step. To get to the step where you have to pause the game and talk about it is quite rare in my experience, but it's really rare that compromise step does not solve the problem. Like 98% of the time, talking through a compromise will solve the problem. It'll actually solve it if your players actually are friends and they're good people and they want to play a fun game and the emotions are just running high. It's going to solve the problem generally. The only times I've seen when it won't solve the problem is when you actually have a player who actually is a problem. And this will be very obvious. Basically, if this situation happens, you'll have one player who is rational, willing to compromise, willing to get back to the game and have fun, where the other person is just making it personal, and they're not really giving any wiggle room and they're being passive aggressive, and it's obviously a problem. And obviously they are the problem. In this situation, I hate to say this, but there's really nothing to be done but to stop the game, maybe stop the game early, or maybe just try to sidestep it or something. Basically get to the end of the session, and then you're going to have to remove that player from the game before the next session. That is the only way to stop that kind of situation. If a player will not negotiate a fun solution, calm down, say, hey, I got upset, but let's get back to the game. I do want to get back to the game. Thank you, GM, for raising awareness. Thank you for talking through it. Hey, player, thank you. Let's shake hands. Let's get back to the game. If you have a player who will not take this situation, calm down and just get back to the game. Like a player who isn't that reasonable, it's not going to work. It's straight up not going to work out. And you can comment, let me know if you disagree, but a player who will not compromise, calm down, and even give, some of their own, just to make the game work, it's not going to work. The player is going to be a problem player. It's not going to be good. And you're going to be way ahead of the curve, just not inviting that player back to your table. So by the time you reach the compromise stage, if you have reasonable players, you're gonna get the problem solved if you're willing to talk it through a little bit. And if that doesn't solve the problem, you probably have a problem player, or maybe rarely two problem players who are arguing with each other. But generally speaking, one of them is a problem and one of them is reasonable and willing to compromise. And you will very quickly see that if both of them were being as reasonable as the one was being, there would be no issue. The reason there's even an issue is because one of them is being unreasonable, and unreasonable people are not going to succeed at playing D&D. It's just not going to work. Reasonable people don't want to play D&D with unreasonable people. And as a GM, you're going to be way further ahead if you just remove that person from your game. Boom. That concludes my steps. And I just want to close with this note. At the end of the day, it is the GM's role in this situation to be the unbiased and unfazed arbiter of disagreement resolution. As the GM, you're sort of the community organizer. You're kind of like the leader of the committee, right? Everyone has a vote. Everyone has a say. You're coming together for a shared purpose, but you are the one who kind of announces the meeting, plans the times, organizes the snacks. You're the one who will probably need to speak up first if there is a conflict, and it's really your job to help arbitrate it. You might have other players who help with this, which is awesome. But at the end of the day, as the GM, it's really up to us to take the initiative to help head these problems off. And unfortunately, as the organizer of the game, it's probably our responsibility to remove problem players too. It's also our responsibility to stay calm and cool and not to let ourselves get into conflicts with players. We want to be the ones who are reasonable, laughing, having fun, keeping the game fun for the players, etc. And yeah, those are my steps. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment and let me know. I would be interested to hear what your conflict resolution steps look like in D&D. And with that being said, that is going to be a wrap for today. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the Morning. I'm here every day talking about the best game in the world, D&D. So I will see you awesome people on the next one.